Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving, and sometimes renting fast if you're the car chick. Now, here she is.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Straight Shift. I cannot believe that it is fall already. Not that you would notice here in the Carolinas because it's still 93 freaking degrees, but we are heading into the fourth quarter of 2019. And one of the things that you see this time of year is a lot of ads for these amazing sales and specials and deals on new cars. The dealers are trying to get rid of their leftover 2019 models as the 2020 models are starting to hit lots. Some are already out there. Some are going to be rolling out over the next few months. But there's a lot going on right now. And you may actually start seeing the holiday car shopping ads show up on the television as early as October. I mean, come on, Walmart has had their Christmas decorations out for a month now, so it really shouldn't surprise anybody. But you may see different types of specials. You may see special prices and advertised discounts on new cars. You may see leasing specials or low or zero interest rates. All of these specials or sales on new cars are made possible by incentives offered by the manufacturer. Now, these incentives are not offered by the individual dealers, but rather by the manufacturer to help the dealers sell cars and move inventory. And these incentives are awesome. They can help you get a really great deal, but they can also be really, really confusing to figure out how they work. So today I thought I would do this episode all about figuring out new car incentives. I'm going to break it down and give you the straight shift on what the different types of incentives are, how they work, who does and does not qualify for them. Some you can combine, some you can't. How do you understand these incentives so that you can take advantage of the best ones to get yourselves the best deal? And to make matters worse, all these ads for these specials can be really misleading because the deal that they're touting in the ad usually has a good 200 stipulations that are only listed in the fine print that you have to have a microscope and a lawyer to read and understand. But I'm going to try and break it down today and make it easier to understand. Incentives, in my mind at least, fall down into three categories: cash incentives, APRs or interest rates, and leasing incentives. I'm going to start with the leasing incentives first because, believe it or not, those are actually the least complicated. When you see advertised lease specials, you will typically see lease a whatever kind of car for some low monthly payment. For example, right now there happens to be a lease special on a 2019 Nissan Sentra for just $139 a month for 36 months. That sounds freaking fantastic, right? Get a brand new car for $139 a month? But only if that were true. Here's where you need to bust out that microscope and start reading the fine print. That monthly payment of $139 does not include a bunch of stuff. It does not include taxes, tag and title fees, and other fees. And it's not that the car companies are deliberately trying to mislead you into thinking that it really is that cheap to lease that car, so you'll run down to the dealership right now and get one. That's just kind of a bonus. Really, it's because the tax and fees and the way lease monthly payments are truly calculated vary by state. And sometimes they even vary by county or city because of the different state laws and how different taxes work in different states and how those taxes are applied specifically to leasing. I'm not going to go into all those details because I have covered leasing extensively in some other episodes. I think episode 28 was one of the big ones. So if you want to know more about leasing, just go back and listen to that. But for advertising purposes, what the manufacturers do is they just advertise the very base monthly payment and then put a big disclaimer in that fine print that says it doesn't include taxes, fees, yada, yada, yada. That fine print usually also says that there's a fairly large chunk of change due at signing, meaning you've got to come up with a significant down payment to help get you to that low monthly payment. So for example, on this Nissan Sentra lease, $139 a month, among other things, includes putting $3,500 down. You can argue that maybe somebody who's looking for that inexpensive of a car payment may not have $3,500 in cash saved up for that down payment. I don't. So again, that, it's a little bit misleading if you don't read all that fine print. And there's usually a whole bunch of other stipulations that you may or may not even meet. This Sentra deal actually is only available to, quote, well-qualified leasees, and that's true on most of your leasing specials, meaning that you have to have near perfect credit to qualify for that particular lease. And this one also happens to have a stipulation that you have to show proof that you have leased with Nissan before. So if you've never had a lease on a Nissan before, you're not going to get this one at that price either. It's what's called a loyalty incentive. So this is your first Nissan lease. Guess what? You're out of luck. None of this stuff applies to you, and you're not going to be able to get that payment. You can still lease one, but not at that price. And then finally, you've got to really look carefully at the mileage allowance. Many of these lease deals advertising ridiculously low monthly payments for that type of car. The lease is not for, what your standard of 12,000 miles a year is. They might be 10,000 miles a year. On some of your Highline cars like Mercedes and BMW and whatnot, they may be as low as 7 or even 5,000 miles a year. So, that's huge. Given that most people today actually drive 15,000 miles a year, even a normal 12,000 mile a year lease may not be enough. So that low advertised lease price for the month may only include being able to drive the car once a week to the grocery store and back, and then you got to put it back in your garage. So again, read that fine print and don't just get sucked into that advertised low monthly payment because it's 100% BS. There's a lot of stipulations around that. And realistically, when you actually go into the dealership and put together a lease deal that truly works for you, your monthly payment's going to be a heck of a lot higher than what was advertised 9 times out of 10. Okay, the second type of incentive that you see advertised will be either a low or sometimes a 0% financing, a 0% APR. And since most people have to finance cars to be able to afford them, not everybody has a whole bunch of cash just sitting around that they can pay for them. Yay for you if you do, that's awesome. But the interest rate has a really big impact on what your monthly payment is. So sometimes the manufacturers and their captive finance company, because every manufacturer has their own basically bank that loans money both to you as a consumer to finance the car or to lease the car, but also to provide financing to the dealers so that they, can put inventory on their lot. Most dealers don't pay cash for all the cars that are sitting on their lot. They have what's called a floor plan, which is a special kind of loan arrangement with the manufacturer to be able to get those cars on their lot without having to actually fork out bazillions of dollars in cash to buy them outright from the manufacturer. That's just a little behind the scenes thing. But the captive finance company is the one that would provide you as the customer that low or zero APR or that lease. For example, right now, Toyota has a 0% for up to 60 months or 1.9% for 72 months, because usually when you bump up to a 72-month loan, that rate goes up. Sometimes it goes up more incrementally. Sometimes there'll be a 0% for 36 and then 0.9 for 48, 1.9 for 60, 2.9 for 72. It really just depends on what that manufacturer's captive finance company feels like doing and the strength of their own ability as a bank to loan you money. So, be sure you look at what the different rates are for the different loan terms and figure out what's appropriate to you. But Toyota has that 0% for up to 60 months on the leftover 2019 Highlanders right now. I just negotiated that deal for one of my clients. The car is being delivered today. Yay. But again, you have to have outstanding tier 1 credit to be able to qualify for these. So if you have kind of an average mediocre credit rating, maybe your credit is, like 650 or 670, it's not 750 or 780, you're not going to get these rates. They may still have some decent rates for you, but you will not get that 0%. These rates are for, quote, well-qualified buyers, which is just a nice fancy way of saying people with really stellar credit. When you see these low APRs, let's just assume that you do have good credit and you would qualify for these rates. These APR specials are typically in lieu of, meaning that you can either take this 0% interest rate or you can take some cash rebate, this $2,000 rebate. And in a minute, after we take a break, I'll get back into the details of how the cash incentives work. But you need to take a look at which is going to be the better deal for you. When, over the past several years, we've really enjoyed ridiculously low interest rates on cars because the prime interest rate has been low, and car loan rates, because they're short term, they're tied to prime. And this is getting into the financial market, so we won't go too far down that path. But we've just been spoiled by really low interest rates. About 2 years ago, we were seeing even normal banks, like Bank of America and Wells Fargo and all those guys were offering new car loan rates, at like 2%. Some of the credit unions, were down at, 1.5%. And this is not, some manufacturer backed special rate. This is just what interest rates were because of where the financial markets were. And over the last 2 years, as we've seen some changes in the economy, those interest rates have been creeping up. And, right now, even for people with really stellar credit, new car rates are kind of hovering around 4.5%, even 5%, depending on kind of where you are in the country. So that can make a big difference. These lower 0% APRs, being able to take advantage of that versus paying 4 or 5% from your bank or one of the dealers' bank relationships, that's going to make a big deal on your monthly payment. And you know me, I like to do math. Well, I don't like to do math, let's be honest here. I feel it is important to do math so that we're dealing in hard numbers and we can really quantify what is going to be the best deal and how much money are we saving. So, of course, let's do some math here. Let's just pretend you're buying a brand new car and you're going to finance $30,000 of it. At 4% financing for 60 months, which is, 5 years, that's honestly what most people do these days, your payment is going to be about $552.50 a month. But if you qualify for a 0% interest rate, now all of a sudden that payment financing for 60 months, that goes down to an even $500 a month. So you're saving over $52 a month, and that translates to $3,000 over the life of the loan. $50 a month is a pretty big deal, and especially $3,000 total on how much you end up really paying for the car in reality, including that interest you pay over the loan. So here's an example where that 0% interest rate can save you a good chunk of cash over the life of that loan. So one would think, wow, it is always right to take that 0% APR. That's the best incentive that I can get, right? Well, not necessarily. Here's where it gets complicated. And on that note, I'm going to take a really quick break. And when we come back, I'm going to get into the cash incentives, talk about how those work, and then tie it all together with how do these, low APRs versus rebates, which is the better way to do it? How do you figure out what incentives will be combined to give you, in your situation, the best possible deal? So hang on, folks. I'll be right back after this. Do you hate car shopping? Do you worry about being taken advantage of or about finding the right car at a great price? Buying a car can be a frustrating and time-consuming experience. But what if you could get a great deal without having to do a ton of research, without having to haggle, and without the fear of buying a lemon? You can. As your personal car shopper, the Car Chick will help you pick the perfect car based on your unique lifestyle, budget, and personality. She'll handle all of the legwork and negotiating for you. All you have to do is sign the papers and take the keys. It's that easy. To learn how the Car Chick can save you time, money, and hassle on your next car purchase, give us a call at 704-248-8706. That's 704-248-8706. Or visit us on the web at thecarchick.com.
Ah, the Car Chick is back for more Straight Shift.
Welcome back to the Straight Shift. We are demystifying the complicated new car incentives and how you figure out what they are, what they mean, if you qualify, and which ones to take to get yourself the best deal when you're negotiating on a new car. Now, I want to clarify, these incentives only apply to new cars. Occasionally you will get like a low APR or, finance incentive on a certified pre-owned car. Sometimes manufacturers will have a lower interest rate on a certified pre-owned car than the traditional banks are offering on regular used cars. So if you are looking for a certified pre-owned car, be sure to check and see if the manufacturer has any special interest rates on one of those, because you're not going to have cash incentives, which I'm going to talk about now, on used cars. So anytime you can take advantage of a lower interest rate than you could get from your bank without having to give up any cash rebates, that's usually the best thing to do. But if you're shopping for a new car, that lower 0% APR may or may not be the best incentive for you to take to get yourself the best deal. So let's talk about what these different cash incentives are and how they work. Typically, these are rebates, and there's a legal definition to the term rebate, and sometimes it is a true rebate, sometimes it's not. Typically, the difference is that in most states, the rebate comes off of the total price after taxes, not off the price of the car before taxes. But it really depends on how that incentive is structured and how it meets the law. So that's just kind of a nitty-gritty, and if you don't know the details of the incentive, you're going to have to rely on the dealer to calculate that for you correctly. But you can always ask, hey, is this customer cash or this cash incentive, is that a rebate that comes off after the taxes, or is it an incentive that comes off the price of the car before you calculate taxes? Anything that comes off the price of the car before the taxes are calculated is better, because obviously the taxes are calculated on that selling price of the car. So the lower you can get that down, you're going to save a few extra bucks on your taxes. I'm all about saving, every last penny that you possibly can. So that's something you'll have to ask about. But typically, let's just assume for the sake of this conversation that we're just talking about rebates. You're still looking at typically customer cash or dealer cash. Customer cash is a cash rebate, and these are typically anywhere from $500 up to a few $1,000s that are advertised to the public. These are the ones that you'll see advertised in the TV ads, or if you go to the manufacturer's website and look for specials or incentives or kind of whatever they're calling them on their website, you'll see these. Most of them are advertised to the public. Occasionally, there will be some that are not advertised or are not advertised in an easy place or are remotely easy to understand. But this is something that is directly for the consumer as a rebate to lower the price of the car. And the manufacturer still reimburses the dealer for that money when they close the transaction. They sell the car to you. They file all the paperwork. They have to file special paperwork with the manufacturer to prove that, yes, we sold this car to this person and the deal meets the criteria for this rebate. Please give us our money now. And so because it's advertised, it's designed to be customer cash. It's specifically designed to give you a discount on the car. The dealer typically will pass that money on to you. Now, that does not mean that they are required by any sort of law to do that. So I have seen dealers not discount the price of the car to account for all of the rebates that apply to that customer. Sometimes they'll give you the obvious ones like, oh, yeah, because the manufacturer advertised this on TV and on their website, this $2,000 rebate we're going to give to you. But we actually know about, another $1,000 in rebates that if you don't know about, we're not going to tell you about, and we're going to pocket that money for ourselves. So it's really important for you to do the research to know exactly what rebates are out there and which ones apply to you. That information is not always available to the general public or easy to find or understand. So I recommend going out and doing some research on good research sites. Edmunds is one of my favorite. IntelliChoice, even Kelley Blue Book now shows some of the incentives. You can Google new car incentives and a whole bunch of different websites will come up. I strongly encourage you to look at several different sites and compare notes and see who is talking about what incentive, because they might not all get all of them or know about all of them or publish all of them. And then always go back to the manufacturer's website and see what incentives the manufacturer is actually advertising, because there may be something on there that these other third-party sites haven't picked up on. What happens is as you go through a month, the dealers and the manufacturers are monitoring how many cars are selling. And so if they get into the second half of the month and the first half of the month, they didn't sell as many cars as they wanted to, and it looks like they're at risk of not making their sales numbers for that month, the manufacturer may release another rebate later in the month to say, hey, okay, we need to sweeten the pot a little more, get some more butts in our doors and sell some cars. So it's not uncommon for those incentives to change a little bit as the month goes on. So if you are car shopping in the second half of the month, be sure you relook at the incentives and say, has anything else dropped that I can take advantage of? That'd be great. Often when the manufacturers do that, though, it's something to the dealers. They don't necessarily advertise it to the public. So it's just important to ask these questions. Not all dealers are going to be 100% honest with you about it, but a lot of them will. The dealers that I work with tend to be honest about it because they know that I have access to the same information that they do. So it's really hard for them to hide anything from me. But it just means that if you're car shopping on your own, you just really have to do your diligence. Now, these different types of customer rebates, they don't all necessarily apply to all customers. There are often stipulations. And this is where, unfortunately, it gets even more complicated because you have to figure out, is this rebate one that I can get or do I not qualify for it? I've talked about, general customer cash, incentives that are labeled literally, quote, customer cash. Those usually apply to anybody who is buying one of these cars. Now, these cash incentives can vary between whether you're buying the car or you're leasing the car. Very often, the rebates that apply to leasing are different than the ones that apply to purchasing, or the rebate may not apply to leasing at all because there's a special leasing incentive that, gives you that low monthly payment because they've either held up the residual value extra high and they have a low money factor, which is the leasing equivalent of an interest rate. But sometimes there's good rebates for leasing too. Hyundai is one of these weird manufacturers, and I use that term very affectionately, that sometimes the rebates for leasing are actually higher than the rebates for buying because they're really trying to get people to lease their cars. They like leasing because it generates customer loyalty and it's a part of their long-term strategy for selling cars over time. In those cases, sometimes I will have a client who, we're really not, we don't want to lease a car. They're not a good lease candidate. They drive too many miles. But there's enough, there's $2,000 or $3,000 more in rebates if you lease than if you buy, in which case I tell them, you know what? You have good credit. Let's go ahead and lease this car. We'll lease it for higher miles. We'll see if they'll do, a 15 or even 18. I've even got a client, we did a 20,000 mile a year lease for her because the rebates for leasing were ridiculous, and it was stupid to not take their money. Even if we had to do a normal 12 or 15,000 mile a year lease for her and go ahead, do the lease, take the rebates, and in 6 months refinance that lease into a traditional loan, we still would have saved her more money doing that approach than if we had just bought the car outright from the dealer in the first place. So that's one of those super extra complicated situations where I've learned how to kind of work the system in certain situations. But be sure you understand if you're looking at a rebate, does it apply to purchases? Does it apply to leases? Does it apply to either one? And what's going to be best for you? And then you have to figure out, are there stipulations on this rebate that I might not qualify for? Very often you will see a loyalty rebate where you get another $1,000 for customers that own or lease another model of our car, usually within a certain number of years. And you don't necessarily have to trade in that car or be terminating your lease. Say your spouse drives, a Toyota, and now you want a Toyota, and there's a loyalty rebate. Your spouse doesn't have to trade in his or her Toyota. Just say, hey, yep, we already are a Toyota family and we want another one. And Toyota's going to go, yay, we love you. Thank you for your loyalty. Here's some extra money towards the price of the car. On the flip side, frequently they will have what's called competitive cash, meaning they are trying to steal customers away from other brands that they feel are their direct competitors. And you'll see this especially a lot in your highline cars, like BMW, Lexus, Mercedes, Audi. They will often say that, if you own or lease somewhere in your family, in your immediate family, you or your spouse, if you have one of these other cars, let's say, you have an Audi in your driveway and we want you to buy our Mercedes, we're going to give you an extra $1,000 to buy our Mercedes instead of buying another Audi. So that's called competitive cash. Now, if you own a Toyota, you're out of luck because they don't care. They will actually specify in that fine print for that rebate that it only applies to people who currently own or lease a blah, 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 blah. And they make it very specific down to the actual make and model vehicle that the rebate applies to. So again, read the fine print, and you will have to prove that you have one of those. You will have to give them a copy of the registration card for that vehicle showing, yes, you currently own it, it's currently registered, and then they send that back to the manufacturer as proof that you met the requirement for that rebate. Some rebates apply to people that have certain jobs. You'll often see like a $500 rebate for anyone who is currently serving in the military, either active or reserves, or for veterans who have, come out of the military within the last X number of years. You may see a $500 rebate here or there for first responders. So if you qualify as a first responder, police, fire, EMTs, they're going to give you a special rebate just, to thank the people who are serving our country and serving our society in some way. And that's awesome. But you will have to prove, with some sort of documentation that you do hold one of these positions and therefore you qualify for these rebates. Sometimes they'll have a special for recent college graduates. If you've graduated from college, within the last 6 months, or you're going to graduate within the next 90 days, you will qualify for this rebate because, you're graduating from college. Yay. Hopefully you have a job and we want you to buy one of our cars and become a customer for life. So there's another one. So where it gets hinky is that when dealers advertise these low prices of the cars that are on their lot, and you'll frequently see it on their website or in newspaper ads. I can't remember the last time I actually read a paper newspaper, so I don't really know about advertising in newspapers anymore. Does anybody still do that? But, frequently you go into their website and you're looking in their inventory and you see, they'll show these crazy advertised prices, but there will be microscopic print somewhere that says that advertised sale price includes all of these rebates. And what they'll do is they will literally add up every single possible rebate that the manufacturer offers and then magically get to that incredibly low price. So it looks like, you're going to be able to save $10,000 off the price of this car. But here's where that's complete and total BS. It is, 99% of the time, logistically impossible for any one human to qualify for every single one of those rebates. So that price is BS. You're never going to get to that price because you're not going to qualify for every single one of those rebates because a lot of them are mutually exclusive. So I really hate it when dealers do that. I understand why they do it because it's just so competitive with people doing a lot of shopping around on the internet. And, people do. They look at the low price and they're like, oh, I'm going to go talk to those guys. And people don't read the fine print. And so, this is what I call the old bait and switch. And unfortunately, as long as they have that microscopic fine print somewhere that explains how they got to that low price, it's perfectly legal. Your fault for not being skeptical and looking for that fine print and reading it and understanding that that price is completely and totally unrealistic. It is a fictional on TV price only. So it just irritates me though that, I just don't like the bait and switch. It's technically legal, but in my opinion, it's just kind of shady. But, I understand how competitive it is for dealerships, and sometimes they got to do what they got to do. So you as the car shopper need to be smart about it, and you need to realize, okay, how did they get to that price? Really? Because, they may also have done some other things, that has its stipulations. Sometimes that advertised price will say includes $1,000 trade-in allowance. Okay, so now you've got to trade your vehicle to them and it has to be worth a certain amount of money. Might include a $1,000 financing incentive, meaning you have to finance with one of their preferred banks, probably at a really high interest rate, because that bank's going to give them money on the back end to then qualify for that. Those are, quote, incentives that individual dealerships make up. And that really makes me mad when they do that, because I think that that's just kind of shady too, even though, again, it's totally legal as long as they disclose that somewhere in writing. But it just grates on my nerves. And when dealers do that and I see that, I'm like, I'm not even going to call you, because if you're doing that, what else are you doing? But that's just me. So that is how all these different cash rebates and incentives work. And one of the other catches is that those cash rebates are often in lieu of that low APR or 0% interest rate that we discussed before. So you need to read that fine print and see, is this 0% APR combinable with these cash incentives? It may be combinable with some of them, but not others. It may not be combinable with any of them. So that's when it's time to do math again, because you need to see, okay, should I take the $2,000 rebate and then have to just finance at a normal bank interest rate, like maybe 4%, or should I give up that $2,000 rebate? The price of the car is going to be $2,000 higher, but I'm getting a 0% interest rate because I'm going to finance it over 60 months. And maybe in the long run, that's going to save me more money than that rebate would have. This is where you've got to run your numbers, look at the monthly payment, and look at then the total cost that you're paying over the life of the loan, depending on how long you're financing it for, which is better. I'm a nerd. You guys know this if you've been listening to me. So I built a spreadsheet that I just pop in a couple of variables and it actually calculates all that for me and tells me which is better. And it really depends on, the amount you're financing and what is that interest rate that you can get through the normal bank. If you're a member of a credit union and you can still get, like a 2.9% rate through them, that's going to change this business case. That's a lot closer to 0% than 4% is. If you're going to finance it for 60 or 72 months, you're going to accumulate interest over a longer period of time than if you're only going to finance it, for 36 months, or you have every intention of paying it off really early. So you have to look at your specific situation and run the numbers and see which is the better deal for me? I literally just went through this which direction do we go scenario with one of my clients who is buying a 2019 Highlander. That's the one being delivered today. And, it was a $2,000 rebate versus a 0% APR. And they qualified for 3.89% through the normal bank. And they were putting a lot of money down. So we were really only financing about half the price of that car. So when I put it into my spreadsheet, man, it came out really close. It was within a few $100s, kind of being 6 of one, half dozen of the other. And, if they decided to finance it for 60 months, it was better to take the 0%. But they typically finance for 48 months. And so if we looked at financing at only 48 months, then it flipped. And it was better to take the rebate. So they had to make some decisions on how long they wanted to finance this car. And, looking at their greater financial picture of what are they doing with their money overall, what was the best financial decision for them? And my job was to give them the numbers in these different scenarios and say, which one do you want to do? We've got 4 different options here. What's best for you? You are the only person who can make that decision. But that's where you get into running those numbers and be sure you really understand. Another type of cash incentive that I'll just touch on really quickly is called dealer cash. Sometimes it's marketing cash. And that is money that is typically not advertised to the public, that the manufacturer says, hey, dealers, when you sell cars, we're going to give you some money behind the scenes, to thank you. It's like an extra commission on the car, or here's an extra $1,000 that you can put towards marketing for next month. And that's dealer cash on that deal. And a nice dealer will pass that along to the customer, but they don't have to. And if you don't know about it and you don't know to ask for it, they may not tell you about it. They may choose to keep that money to themselves and just increase their profit on that car. That's their prerogative. They can do that. So, you may want to ask about that or try and do some research online and see if you can find any of those dealer cash incentives. The last thing that you need to check on any of these incentives is, when is this good through? Usually the incentives are good just until the end of the current month. If the month ends in the middle of a weekend, then they may extend it to the next couple days into the next month so that they can count kind of that weekend as the previous month. Sometimes they'll go on for 2 or 3 months. I've seen incentives in place for 6 months, especially if it's something like a first responder cash or, here's $500 rebate if you're buying this car to drive for Uber or Lyft. There's literally incentives for that for some manufacturers. So you'll be sure you know when that incentive expires so that you make sure that you get your deal closed, the paperwork is signed, the keys are in your hand by that date so you don't risk losing that incentive, because we don't even know. The dealers don't know. I don't know. Starting that next month, what are the incentives going to be? The manufacturers don't give us a heads up. Literally the first day of the month, there's a fax in the morning or an email in the morning saying, okay, here's the incentives for this month. So we just don't know. You as a consumer won't know. So be sure you understand when those incentives are due to expire. I know that's a lot of really complicated stuff on these incentives. They are not always easy to figure out, but that is the straight shift on how they work. So if you are shopping for a new car, be sure to thoroughly research those incentives, do some math, figure out what applies to you, what doesn't, so that you can get the best deal for yourself. Or if you don't want to deal with it, go ahead and give me a call at thecarchick.com. Until next time, folks, I'm out of here. Drive safely.
The Straight Shift Podcast is copyright LeeAnn Shattuck, The Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of LeeAnn Shattuck or The Car Chick.